The B.S Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the B.S Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The B.S Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The B.S Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. This is part 2 of the Mega Draft podcast. If you missed part 1, we had Minnesota GM David Kahn. That's on iTunes and Pod Center. Here's part 2. Coming up at the very end, we're going to call my buddy House, just because the Wizards picked the most exciting guy in the draft. We got to get his take. That's his team. Right now on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. ESPN.com's Henry Abbott. What's happening?
Not much. How are you doing?
You know, it wasn't an exciting draft, obviously, but I do wonder if the draft is just fundamentally evolving into something else, because there's just no comedy left. I mean, you had the Jan Vesely thing, kissing the girlfriend, but other than that, like, these guys everybody's so self-aware now. It's just become this functional draft. Do you sense that, or am I just overthinking this?
Well, I thought that Leonard had a pretty good suit. I thought that was a good sort of zany look. I like that.
Yeah, that was good. I'll agree with that.
Did you see the little Vesely's girlfriend kind of killing his free throw shooting? Did you see that?
No.
Yeah. So afterwards, it's actually on TrueHoop right now. There's a little video of it, but she's very tall. She's like legit 6'5", and
wow.
Which when you see it in person is really something. And this guy, Kyle Weedeye from Truth About It, went and did a little video interview with her about, how they met, and his dad was her geography teacher in elementary school, and this is a touching story, and they both play basketball, and someone asked, well, can you score points on him? She's like, oh, yeah, because I can shoot, and he can't shoot, so I can always score points, and, free throw shooting, I kill him, and he shot something like 40%, 41% from the line in EuroLeague last year, and, and so someone's like, well, are you his free throw coach? And she was like, I should be. So, I don't know. That was great. There's a little touch of romance, a little touch of chiding. That's good. That's what you want out of a draft.
I didn't realize she was 6'5". I thought she was wearing, like, super high heels or something.
I think in addition she was wearing super high heels. And the other tall woman there was his sister, I understand, and she was also similarly tall. And it was funny to see all us celebrity reporters gathered around as they're, like, just, an entire head above the crowd.
Yeah. Where did you stand in terms of what Cleveland did? They came out of the draft with Kyrie Irving and then Tristan Thompson, which I thought was a big curveball at number 4. I personally would have rather have taken Derrick Williams at 1 and Brandon Knight at number 4. What do you think of that?
This is where I don't pretend to be a basketball expert in that manner, but, man, just from my chair, I would have taken Derrick Williams first overall, too. A guy that size who's athletic and can shoot and has murdered people on the screen in front of us already. It's hard to see how he's not going to be a good NBA player. I'm mystified by that. As a Portland Trailblazers fan, I do worry about players who were injured during their brief time in college. It does worry me. But
that's a
I don't
pretty
know.
good
Brandon
point.
Knight was, the idea is that he can shoot the lights out, and that makes up for that he's not as good at everything else. But he doesn't even, in college, he didn't shoot. He wasn't even like the best at his position shooting in college. He was back in the pack. So he's a guy who works his brains out and is super, super smart. So I expect he'll figure it out. But I like their draft. I mean, I think that's a great. I don't mind Tristan Thompson being an unconventional pick. Like, he is total stat geek pick. They have Dan Rosenbaum has been advising that team, like one of the best stat geeks, and he didn't email me back, but I emailed him. Looks like you got to make a pick. And it'll be interesting to see if it works. But everybody seems to love Tristan Thompson. Everybody who met him, everybody who watched film, all the experts were very high on him. So if he didn't go 4, he was going to go high.
So you're saying that was an advanced metrics pick, because I remember in Hollinger's Draft Radar, which I thought was really good, Tristan Thompson did very well in that. So when they picked him 4, I was like, wow, that seems like a stat pick.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a stat pick. And that's a pretty stat-focused team.
Right. Here's my counter to that, though. it was a really weak college basketball season. And, and I guess you could make this same argument with Derrick Williams, somebody like that, but when you have a weak season in general for talent, and it's easier for these guys to put up stats, it's harder for me to put that in a context. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, maybe Tristan Thompson was putting up good stats for a power forward, but what if he was playing during a season where there were a lot of good power forwards, Or am I overthinking that?
Well, there's the one stat that I think really is worth focusing on and consistently, gives value for teams drafting in the NBA draft is rebounding percentage. And here, I think I really get this. Like, went down to David Thorpe's Train Like a Pro thing, and we did drills where it was like drills for your brain, specifically to see rebounds out of your area and go get them. And if you watch basketball, like, you can see if like a guy's on one side of the lane and the ball bounces to the other side, very few players will run across the lane to go get that ball. But we're all, even at our limited athletic potential for you and me, we're all capable of running across the lane at a time it takes a ball to clank off the rim. We just don't. But the guys who get huge rebounding numbers, they see that. They have this vision, like, oh, that's the ball I can get. And, Dennis Rodman was running all over the place. Yeah. And so guys who think like that, who see those balls, like, they go get a zillion of them, and that translates. Like, a lot of it works in college doesn't translate to the NBA, but that one skill completely translates because it's like a psychological trait. And so, he's a guy who did that. He's a guy who runs all over the court to get rebounds, and that'll work.
You know who's like that?
Who's like that?
Me.
Oh, there you go.
I played. Yeah, hey, listen, it's all about geometry. Somebody shoots from a certain spot on the court, the ball's going to go in like 3 different directions.
Right.
And once you figure out the geometry, it's easy to rebound. It's always amazing to me that, you see these guys, especially the power forwards, they're so talented and they're, such great athletes, and they'll be standing in some weird spot when somebody's taking a jumper and not moving. Like, if you watch Kevin Love in person, that dude's always moving to weird spots. And even as the shot's going up, if you don't know what he's doing, you're thinking, where's he going? And then you realize, oh, yeah, he ran to the left side there because the ball, if it ricocheted that way, it's going to go right to him.
I'll tell you what else. People have always how does Jason Kidd get so many rebounds as a guard? And they come up with all these cockamamie stories about, his body type or whatever it is. But if you watch, he gets a huge number of rebounds by running to the free throw line, which is where, not a ton of misses go there, but all the ones that turn into easy rebounds go there because they fight for the position, the other spots, right? But if you do, this works in your pickup game. If you run, if you have no idea, don't even look at the ball, don't even worry about where it's going. But if you run there, you're going to have an acre of space to yourself, and if the ball lucks into that spot, it's all yours. Yeah,
and you might get the tips too when somebody's trying to get it and they tip it like 4 feet back.
You're standing there balanced and ready to jump, like wherever it goes, you got a shot at it.
What did you think of the big Cleveland, Sacramento, Milwaukee, Charlotte small market menage a trois trade with the 3 swingmen getting passed around?
Well, I felt good about it until you made it sound so dirty. I don't understand. I think the Sacramento thing is potentially an absolute disaster. They lead the league of ball stoppers.
Whoa, I wrote that in my diary today. 2 black holes now.
Well, they have 5 black holes. I mean, everybody on that team, now they have Salmon's back, and Marcus Thornton, everybody just wants the ball the whole time.
Yeah.
And Jimmer is, I really couldn't be more enthusiastic for the guy. I want him to do super well. But he is perfectly positioned to be the biggest disappointment in a long time just because the expectations are so ridiculous. He's going to have a big, challenging adjustment, and maybe he'll do really well. But the likelihood is that he won't be the Rookie of the Year, and that will be seen as a failure, which is unfair to him. But so you're going to have a letdown on Jimmer, and then you're going to have a bunch of guys fighting for the ball. You're going to have bad defense. And, I could see a Sports Illustrated cover in the spring being like, oh, those hapless Kings, it's their do-or-die year to save the team in that town. And I'm worried about it. I really am.
Do you think, though, we just need to readjust our expectations for Jimmer? Because this is a weak draft. He does have one skill, which he's going to be able to fill it up, and I think he's a guy that could come off the bench potentially and fill it up in quick hits. And I said in my column, I think his destiny is like a rich man's J.J. Barea, somebody who could come into a game and do what Barea was able to do in some of those Dallas playoff games, but a lot more consistently. Like, if he does that, that's a good pick at number 10, you don't think?
Oh, I think it's a good pick. I just think that people are going to see him, like you're right, we need to readjust our expectations, but good luck with that. I mean, leaving Manhattan yesterday was really hard because Barack Obama was there, Justin Bieber was there, and, non-trivially, Jimmer was there, and there were nut jobs all over town, like, kids were like, one kid's wearing a J shirt, one's IMMER, like people were just going bananas for that guy, beyond all reason, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to stop that, the super force of Jimmer fever.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that they wanted to take him at 7, so they traded back 3 spots. They turned Beno Udre into, Beno Udre, I always mess that name up, into John Salmons. Which, that's an upgrade. If I offered you Beno Udre for John Salmons, you're going to say no most of the time, even though his contract's a little bit longer or Salmons' contract a little bit longer. But so they moved back 3 spots. They got the guy they want. The part that stunned me was that Charlotte basically they downgraded from Steven Jackson to Corey Maggette, which isn't totally a downgrade because Maggetti's a guy who puts up stats on bad teams. That's what he does, and they're going to be bad. But they picked up the 9th pick to do that. Or, the 7th pick. I thought that was a pretty good trade for them.
I mean, look, I think for Charlotte, they've been in the dreaded middle.
Yeah.
And let's guess that what happened is Rich Cho convinced Michael Jordan to go young, to actually do this. Let's try to really do this. So, and if they... my understanding is that they figured out that Biyombo was just the guy they really wanted, and I'm a big believer in, don't just trade an okay player for a slightly better player. Like, identify the very short list of the players you really, really want, and just do whatever it takes to get those guys. And, Biyombo was their guy, and they got him. So hats off to them. And Kemba Walker as a throw-in. Hey, not bad. It's a pretty good draft for them. Yeah,
and Van Gundy made this point last night, and it was a good one. You don't want to be in the middle. You either want to be good or you want to be bad, and you don't want to be in that 30 to 36 win range. You want to bottom out. And, you look at what Jordan did last year. He gave away Tyson Chandler. He didn't re-sign Ray Felton. So they were kind of headed in that direction anyway. This clinched it. It's going to be interesting, though. Steven Jackson doesn't sound like he wants to go to Milwaukee.
Yeah, with Scott Skiles. I feel like that's a... Woo! Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Last night, a lot of, the kind of scuttlebutt in that press area on the floor was, are they really going to keep him in Milwaukee? Is that... He kept expecting the next trade to come because it just seemed like a personality clash that was destined for disaster.
And maybe there will be a second trade. And that was, the most disappointing thing about this particular draft is it was so hard for anybody to make trades because you can't trade restricted free agents, you can't do sign-in trades. So basically, you're ruling out 43% of all the possible guys who could be traded.
Right.
So that's why we had that 1 3-teamer. Everything else was pretty, mostly picks-related type trades. The one that I thought was pretty interesting was Portland. I guess you could say they turned Andre Miller and Rudy Fernandez and the rights to that Finnish guy into Raymond Felton, which I think is a good trade for Portland. You're a Blazers fan. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, Raymond Felton feels a little bit like the dreaded middle we were just talking about.
Yeah.
But I think, if I'm right, he only has 1 year left on his contract, too.
Yeah, you're right.
So, it's not like, you're stuck in the middle, and maybe he's far better. I mean, he's had moments. I feel like he got a little fat. When he was a rookie, he was incredibly athletic, and then he got bigger. I don't know if fat's the right word, but he got bigger, and he started playing more of a power game. I didn't like his game as much like that. I liked it when he was really fast. But, but certainly, it doesn't sneeze at. I don't think it's a big downgrade, certainly, from Andre Miller, who wasn't going to be in Portland long no matter what. And for Rudy, I think, actually there's a guy who works for a Western Conference team, and he has been saying to me for years that everybody thought Rudy would get himself to the Lakers or the Suns or the Mavericks, some team that's very good at using their offense to create space, and then he would just murder everybody. Because in Portland, he very often, with Brandon Roy's injuries and such, and so Brandon stopped drawing a double team, Rudy ended up trying to score on a muscly, large defender, in his grill, and that's just not his game. He's kind of a scrawny dude. But, just like Barea shines in Dallas because they create space for him, Rudy, when Dirk's doubled or Dirk, kicks it to Rudy, he's going to be beautiful there. Like he's a great wide open shooter. And when they do the hot close, he can put the ball on the floor and do all kinds of stuff on the move. And he can finish lobs. I think he'll be great in Dallas.
Yeah, and you make a good point. And this is why I was so intrigued to see who was going to get Johnny Flynn this week. Listen, Johnny Flynn was terrible last year, and he was hurt, and he was really not that good in either season for Minnesota. But if you look at the big picture, it's a guy who was the 6th pick in the draft 2 years ago. Everybody really liked him. He was great in college. I think coming out of that 2009 draft, people liked Flynn as a player. They just didn't understand why you would take Rubio and Flynn.
Right.
So now he goes to this team. They're playing the triangle. How many point guards has the triangle chewed up and spit out? Like 20?
Right.
So, and he's on this team with a bad coach. He's got probably, 35 teammates in 2 years. They're terrible. He's got Rubio hanging over his head. And that's a guy I would try to trade for. And I thought it was interesting that, Houston was the team that traded for him. I thought it was going to be the Knicks. Houston already has 2 point guards, but they must have just felt like he was an asset and they couldn't turn him down. But, man, haven't we learned that you don't give up on young point guards after 2 years? I felt like they just gave up on him. I don't agree with it.
Well, there's also that deal where it's like, for whatever reason, and it doesn't really make sense to me, but it just seems like really good teams can have scorers, like, small scorers who dribble the hell out of the ball. They can come off the bench, and you can win.
Yep.
But if they start, then it just all falls apart. It just doesn't work. So I think that's Houston can stick him in that, Vinnie Johnson, whatever. The role that Allen Iverson wouldn't play in the NBA, but now says he would. Like, Johnny Flynn might be great at that.
Yeah. It was an interesting trade. They also picked up the second Lithuanian guy who...
I'll let you go ahead and tackle the name.
Donatas something. So, 7 feet, 220 pounds, a little bit of an attitude problem apparently, but teams really liked him. I had a couple Knick fans that I'm friends with who were devastated that the Knicks didn't take him at number 17. They just thought he was the last really good guy left on the board, other than the other guy that Houston picked up, who's the guy who can't come here for 4 years. Right. Whatever that for. All these foreign guys, unless I have a sheet in front of me, I can't remember all these names. But these things with these guys that you don't know when they're coming over, you don't know if they're good, they're 220 pounds. Like, I just don't remember a draft that had this big of a crapshoot element to it.
You know what I was thinking too? Like, we much malign our American basketball development system, but one thing it gives us is players who are ready to sign a contract in the NBA, which is
it's very true.
No small thing.
Yeah, I like the one guy. He can't come here for 4 years. So I think if I'm remembering this, Houston was the team that ended up with him. You got to be pretty secure in your job to stash a guy away who's not going to be there for 4 years. How many GMs have even lasted for 8 years? Right. Like 5? Daryl's already been there, I think, 5 years. It's like that means he'll be there, a 9-year run as their GM if that pick pans out.
Although it's entirely possible they trade that pick like 5 times between now and then,
Right. Well, what else jumped out at you about this draft? Was there a team that, I thought it was really interesting that San Antonio got Leonard, because that was a guy that I thought he was going to be a top 8 pick, and I really liked his potential too.
I thought Chad Ford made a great point. He was like, if David Kahn had drafted Leonard, everyone would be like, oh, what an idiot, But since it was the Spurs, everyone's like, oh, he must be great. Like, I think we do that. Like, I do it too. Where the Spurs do it, we just kind of assume it was great because they've done so many smart things in the past. But
yeah, but at the same time, when the draft as it was unfolding, it was clear that he was the guy who was falling. Right. And when Indiana took him, I thought to myself, that's a nice pick by them. Like, that guy's a gamer. Like, they have Hansborough, they have Paul George, they have Granger, Collison. Like, this is a team now that can go out and compete. And then they traded him for George Hill. I thought it was a pretty good trade. Draft. Yeah?
Klay Thompson, to me, like, there was a moment you watch that the highlight reel, and Klay Thompson is almost 6'7" without his shoes on. He can shoot like crazy. He can pass. And I have a feeling when they replay this draft in 5 years and he's really good, everyone's like, how did everybody not think he was going to be great? I think he's not quite the athlete he could be, but maybe suppose he gets even more athletic. I mean, guys like that very seldom fail in the NBA. And then on top of that, they got Jeremy Tyler. Basically, they got a chance at a guy for nothing. I mean, I know there's a lot of knocks on him, but he's still got a huge potential. And then my favorite guy, Charles Jenkins, who I spent the day with yesterday, who was one of the most efficient scorers in college basketball and has decent size for an NBA point guard.
I like the Tyler pick. I like the Tyler pick as well.
Yeah.
That's a guy that, if you're taking a flyer on that guy, that's a good pick. I don't know if I would have spent a first-rounder on him and had to guarantee his contract, but I thought anywhere from like 31 to 34, that's where he should have gone. He should have been one of the first second-rounders. And I agree with you on Thompson. He seems like a prototypical shooting guard, like old school. Not combo, not too short, not a guy who can't shoot, just a guy who has the right size, who can shoot, who can do things. And, the thing I took away from that pick was that Monte Ellis is still on the board, right? I mean, it seems like their next move would be to try to flip him for Iguodala or Rudy Gay or somebody and then they have a more traditional team.
And that's another stat geek story because, 5 years ago, I think you can trade Monte Ellis for all kinds of good players. He just scores like crazy. But he's an inefficient scorer. He's kind of the poster child of someone who looks good by old stats but bad by new stats. And how does that inform your market value in 2011? We'll see. We'll see. If they have to, if they have to bribe somebody to take him, that'll be very interesting.
Explain that to our audience, because I think that's an interesting point. Because, for instance, Michael Beasley is somebody, and I forget who wrote this. Maybe it was even in the Grantland draft preview about Beasley, his PER compared to his usage rate really made him probably the most inefficient scorer in the league for somebody who took a ton of shots. And so you're saying the same thing as in Ellis's case too.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. When we were young and we'd look in the back of the paper and they had the list of the points per game leaders in the league, it was very hard to separate that in your brain from the best players in the league. Like, those were basically the highest paid players, the MVP candidates. And, if you read the AP recap of any story, the first two paragraphs would focus on those players. And Monte Ellis is one of those players.
Right.
But that is not the same thing as being the best player on your team. And, a lot of teams, they have these guys, like Allen Iverson was one, most of his career, who score a ton of points, but by taking a lot of bad shots, some of which they make. And when you make a bad shot, you really look like a hero, because now you're in the highlight reel, you're looking really good. But, good players take good shots. Like, Ray Allen is incredibly efficient, and most of the shots he takes are shots that, a good high school player would make alone in the gym. But that's good for your team, And so Monte Ellis has very high points per game, but points per attempt, he's way down there. So, your team has to win by getting as many points as possible with the limited number of possessions you have, and so that's not really the guy you want making the decisions. And what's more, those super high volume shooters, I think they sometimes have a problem like seeing the strike zone, like shot selection is their kryptonite. And once you don't know what is and is not a good shot, it seems like it's a hard thing to learn. So I have a feeling, with your Iversons and your Ellises, like they're just going to take a lot of shots. Or they'll take no shots, because they're like, oh, coach is yelling at me. But I think that what you really want is just taking the good shots, and, it's hard to become that guy if you don't start as that guy.
The only thing I would say to that, because I like the advanced metrics, and I think a lot of them are valuable. But I think in Ellis's case, first of all, he's on a team that required him to take a lot of shots, and sometimes it's hard to factor that in. Like if you're playing with a bunch of guys who can't score in the low post and David Lee's hurt the whole year, you're going to have to take bad shots. But the thing I like about him is that he's not afraid to take and make big shots in the last 5 minutes. And you look at, how many guys in the league are wired that way. Like, look at Denver. Denver was right there with Oklahoma City in that series, but they didn't have that one guy who could take those shots. And, when at the end of the game, somebody's got to step up and be able to create his shot and hopefully score. And I feel like he's one of those guys.
So, look, you're saying what everybody has always believed, and the more I look at this, the more I think that is just a crock.
Yeah, I know. That's why we're natural enemies of the WAD with this. But I don't think it's a crock, though, because you're saying the stats don't back it up.
Well,
I'd have to look at his crunch
the wins
stats.
don't back it up. I'm saying, this is the Kobe Bryant argument all over again, right? But, by far, so the whole goal is to have your team outscore the other team in crunch time, right? That's the whole point. There's no other point to having any player on the court. And, if you made your list of teams with that guy, they're not outscoring teams in crunch time. The team that's killing everybody in crunch time, well, the two teams are the Mavericks and the Hornets. And they're not killing everybody because Chris Paul and Dirk take all the shots, although in the playoffs the Mavericks did that way. But they're killing because those teams pass the open man in crunch time. They just do the same thing you do all game long.
You're arguing a different philosophy, though, because I agree with you. That's how you win, and Dallas just proved that. But I'm just saying that I think Ellis is a warrior. I've been to games. Anytime I've ever seen him in person, guy plays hard. He gets his shots. He does what he has to do. He's been on bad teams. Now,
but there are still those, he's driving into the lane against three guys while he has, a wide-open, decent mid-range shooter standing there going, hey, I'm over here.
Fair point.
That happens.
Here's my last point on this. You can either concede it or you cannot concede it. Can you win the NBA title unless you have one guy who can score in the last 4 minutes of a game fairly consistently?
I will not concede it. I think you can win. Good offense is good offense, and if you have five guys moving, and what you find is Ray Allen wide open in the corner, great, that'll work. I'll take it. And when you have an offense where everybody knows it's going to go to that one guy, he's doubled, and that's not going to be your best shot. I mean, sometimes it will look like it's saving you, but I think in the big picture, just moving the ball is better.
But Dallas was able to move the ball because they had Dirk Nowitzki, who has to either be double-teamed, and if you don't double-team him, he scores. If he is double-teamed, he's going to find whoever the open guy is. Their spacing was fantastic. Not everybody has him. So
yeah, but I've never seen anything that would convince me that it's anything other than just basketball offense. And so, the clock makes the offense worse, but there's nothing about the clock that makes it so that it has to be focused on one guy. I think it's just a myth, and, not to beat the dead horse here, but the Hornets do not have the guy who takes the shot, and they're the best offense ever. They have the guy who handles the ball, but he just finds the open guy. And sometimes
when you say they're the best offense ever, you're meaning statistically they rate really well? Because, in the playoffs they have trouble scoring.
Statistically, the misnomer. They outscore opponents. Well, actually, no, they score better than any other team in crunch time, and it's not close. They just kill. And this isn't really a stat. This is just basketball. It's they're scoring more, and per possession, which is a smart way to score because you don't want to give people more points just for, playing quick defense that gives up easy buckets. That doesn't make your offense better. So they are just scoring way better, and it's a different guy. Usually not a very good guy. It's David West level guy taking those shots. But and if you look, Paul hasn't taken a lot of them, but they're just so much better than. For instance, the Lakers in crunch time. And it's been that way for years, ever since Chris Paul's been there.
Yeah. I still like Monte. I don't think he's been in the right situation yet. I really don't. For me, it's
David Kahn's job, I would like to make that trade with you.
Well, that's that would be an interesting backcourt to me of Rubio and Monte. And you have Kevin Love throwing outlets and Derrick Williams floating back and forth. And I guess they'd have to trade him to get Monte Ellis. But, yeah, well, someday when we're both GMs, I'm going to try to get Monte Ellis, and then we'll see who's right.
I hope I can trade him to you.
Hey, last thing, I just wanted to hit the Trailblazers quick.
Yeah.
Brandon Roy, what happens with this? Where does this go?
Yeah.
They drafted the Duke kid. I guess they traded Rudy, so you could say he fits into the Rudy spot. But, man, it's just is this the biggest albatross contract in the league, not named Gilbert Arenas?
It's up there. It really is. That said, he has been effective without athleticism his whole career. Now he just has way less athleticism than ever. I don't think he's going to be a zero production guy, but what worries me is the harder things get for him, the more he lashes out about how he needs to be the man. And that's the opposite of how it should go. And actually, it reminds me a little bit of Kobe right now, where now that there's signs of stress, like now that he's less effective, there's a time when we hear how much about how he needs to get the shots first. And I think that gets corrosive in both cases over time. And I don't know if either one of them will adjust to that. And they both have plenty of years left to suffer not really being the most efficient players on their team, even as they're going to want to take a whole bunch of shots.
What's the mood in Rip City? Because a lot of high hopes going into the playoffs. They were like the quote-unquote sleeper. They lose to Dallas, and then Dallas wins the title. So, you could argue maybe that Portland team was better than we thought.
Yeah, you can argue that. You sure can. But, I think the mood is it's now finally clear that, Paul Allen was always the problem. And what are you going to do about
the
that?
GM firing. Yeah, the Rich Cho thing was a little weird.
When people, I really think that Portland just fell in love with Kevin Pritchard. Just haven't had that kind of charisma in that city, anywhere. In any part of the city. This was just a guy who, it seemed like everything he said came true, and just seemed like this kind of charismatic vocal genius, which was, some of that was projecting, of course, but, he is a very inspiring guy in front of the camera. Yeah. And, Rich Cho was not inspiring at all. It was almost comedy. I think everybody liked his shrewdness and his hard work and everything and his databases, but they introduced him as if he were Kevin Pritchard. They made him very public and had cameras following him around, and not one thing memorable happened that whole first day, and they kind of never put him on camera again.
Right.
But, so I don't know. I think there's a leadership vacuum there, and it's they haven't had that thing to latch onto to really get excited about, especially in the face of all this bad news of Odin and Roy's injuries. So I don't know. It feels like a middling team, and it's unclear how it's going to become an unmiddling team unless there's some Greg Oden or Brandon Roy health miracle.
Well, and also, depending on how the salary cap shakes out, they might be in trouble. Because that Brandon Roy contract hogs up a lot of salary. And, I don't know how that's going to work with the rollbacks. And he might be, if there's an amnesty clause, which it seems like there might be, if this all works out, and you could just basically knock a guy off your salary cap and pay him off the way Dallas did with, or Phoenix. Who paid off Michael Feenley? Dallas? It was Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a guy that I think would be an amnesty clause guy, Brandon Roy. I think he wiped that contract off the cap.
This is why I think there's going to be tremendous value in being well under the cap, because someone gets to scoop up those amnesty clause guys, and Michael Finley's next contract was extremely cheap, and so
yeah, and he was valuable.
If I ran an NBA team right now, I would try to be, assuming there will be an amnesty clause, which there might not be, but assuming there is, if you were all the way as low as you could get under the cap, you're going to have your pick of some players.
I think there's going to be one. Although I thought that this would be done by now, and now it really seems like we're going into July, which is a worst-case scenario for you and me, because that's probably our favorite month to write stupid stuff, right? There's nothing more fun than the player movement.
I got a new take on this. I don't care. I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks in July, and I have no care in the world about what happens. When I get back, I'll be very worried about the lockout situation, but as of July 12th, whatever.
Henry Abbott scheduling vacations in July. Wow.
Yeah. That's how it's going this year. It just is. It's just how it's going down.
I remember the days when you would have been working 24/7 in July. Now you're like, yeah, I'm going away. You guys handle this. The True Hoop Network, you guys got this.
I talked to Adam Silver at some length yesterday, and my main point to him was, you better not mess up my vacation, pal.
Yeah, I mean, at gunpoint, if somebody said, what do you think's going to happen? I would say lockout, and it probably goes to September. What would you say? What would be the month that you picked?
I still think they're not going to miss a game, and whatever the date is where the schedule starts getting messed up. I think 6 years ago it was mid-August, they said, when it would start screwing up the fall schedule. I think it'll be done. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's done quickly. Even despite the PA rhetoric in the last couple of days, I just have a feeling that the big pieces are in place. And now the league is talking about $2 billion a year for players, that's the magic number where players' paychecks, the current NBA players' paychecks, look identical all season long next season as they did last season. So there's no real pain there. There's no real rollback. Now, they look the same because of the escrows. They take 8% out, so they don't see that till the end of the year anyway. But I think that was the magic point where the players they're yelling now about principle, but they're not. They don't have the same kind of ideas about just the immediate financial pain. And I think that was the crucial thing to get the votes. I think in the end now, if you ask players if you could have the same paycheck you had last year, this upcoming year, after all the scare tactics by the league, I think most players would take that.
I agree. And I think the best thing going in the favor of the fans is that the players remember the scars of the 99 lockout and what it was like to just not get paychecks for 8 months. And maybe they weren't in the league, but there's veterans who are in the league now who were there then who will tell them, hey, this was bad. You know those 3 houses you have? It's tough to pay for them when you're not getting a salary. And that's my hope, is that there is some sort of trickle-down mental effect. I do wonder, though, because it really does seem like Billy Hunter might have beaten Stern on these last 2 deals.
He's good, man.
The players, 57% is a lot when you look at what this league's revenue is. And, I wonder if this is Stern's last dance. I think in the back of his head, he's got to be thinking, I'm not letting Hunter beat me a 3rd time. I'm going to win this one. I'm not going to go down like this. That's my fear with this dragging along, is Stern just getting stubborn.
It could happen. I do honestly. I know they have to take positions along the road, and the reason they have to do this, by the way, is so that should there be a lockout, I think both sides want to make it as clear as possible that the other side is to blame for the lockout, because there's lots of blame to go around.
Yep.
So they have these articulated public positions at every stage so that if the lockout comes from there, everybody knows how good they were and how bad the other people were. But I really think both sides are incredibly pragmatic and want a deal badly.
I hope so.
And so, if they can get the number that each side knows secretly they have to get, I think it's going to be done. And, now that the league has kind of already made its big move, I think the big move was to get into the $2 billion range, and now that they're already there, I think they're arguing about little things. Also, there's an interesting test here, right, which is, this is basically the way the league is offering it now. It's like, hey, current players, would you like to screw the former players, the future players, and then take their money for you right now? And, I think they'll probably go for that, because they're going to, take a lot of money out of years like 7, 8, 9, 10 from now, which means nothing to veterans.
The rollbacks will be interesting, because they make sense on paper. It worked in hockey. But I really find it hard to believe, and I know it's only a few players that would really get affected, but I find it hard to believe that Kobe Bryant, somebody would go to him and say, hey, Kobe, you know how you're supposed to make $28.5 million in 2012-13? That's going to go down to about 23. Like, I see him being like, wait, what? How about, can it stay at 28? That's what I worry about, because you have the big agents, and we know the agents get their hands involved with this stuff constantly, and they want to protect their best clients. And I just can't imagine the best clients being happy that their salaries could get rolled backwards.
I think you're right. I think that is one of those issues where, like a hard cap and rollbacks, I think, are things that they're just not going to get the votes for in union. Like those really are do or die issues for the voters. But
hold on though. Let me throw this at you. Maybe they do get the votes for that, because how many people would that ultimately affect? If, let's say, you were trying to think of some average player, Von Wafer. Do you care if the salaries are rolling back? For you, it's a difference between $700,000 and $650,000. You just want to play next year. You want your $650,000. You don't want to risk that. So you're going to vote yes. You don't care about Kobe going backwards.
Well, but look what they've already done. Like, the league proposed something that I think is actually an interesting idea, which is, hey, we're going to guarantee, like 75% of your salary or 50% of your salary. So we're saying, if you continue to play and perform, you're going to get the whole thing. But if you're just not playing at all, if you're an Eddie Curry type case, or a Gilbert case, we're just going to pay you more than enough to live on, but less. And they freaked out. It was a over my dead body kind of issue, costing players other benefits. But like, oh no, we're going to have every single dollar guaranteed. So to me, that tells me every single dollar really does matter to Von Wafer.
Yeah.
Or to the union. I also think, now there's a really weird thing. Billy Hunter has made the guaranteed contracts and the hard cap his hill to die on, and which was a position that had a lot of sense to it, I think, and he was winning those. And it all made sense until this week he said, like, well, if we're going to have a hard cap, it would have to be pretty high, like in the 60s. Well, I thought it was a religious issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now I don't get it anymore. Now I feel like you're saying to the league, well, let's talk about this hard cap and where it should be, which was not his position. His position was never a hard cap. You know, he said to me, like, these are the guaranteed contracts are the lifeblood of professional sports, and we've always had that, and we're not about to give that up. And if you have a hard cap, you effectively give up guaranteed contracts because, you know, teams close to the cap won't be able to promise a lot of money. And now he seems like he's okay with it.
It's where it's going to end up. The question will be what year, and I bet it won't be till 4 or 5 years from now. But, you know, you look at what hockey did, and every move they made, you got to hand it to Bettman. It saved that sport, and it made it more competitive, and it just it did all the things that I think everybody had envisioned that doing. And for, you know, I don't really understand the luxury tax thing. It just seems like teams can go over it. They don't care. You know, it makes it more baseball-y than maybe it should be. So I'm hoping they figured out. Anyway.
Here's the part of luxury tax I like is if James Dolan wants to spend a ridiculous amount of money and just, you know, turn a very high revenue team into a money loser. I'm not saying they've lost money. I have no idea. But if he wants to do that, as David Stern or the rest of the owners, you want him to do that because you got to come up with $2.1 billion in salaries for this past season, and the question is how much of that will come from an eccentric billionaire in New York? And the more, the better, right? That's just money that everybody else doesn't have to pay. So that's the luxury tax thing I like. And, you know, in addition to that, you kind of bribe the other owners in the process with actual cash. So if you have a hard cap, you're basically saying, "Oh no, James Dolan, we don't want you to spend all that money here. We want you to be reasonable and let us pay all of our salaries and let us not get those bonuses from you." So that's the one thing is, you know, the Mark Cubans and James Dolans and Paul Allens who have occasionally supplemented the whole league, like that's probably good for the league. It's just more money.
The problem is that money is not spent on the right things usually. It's sticker price money. It's spending, you know, $30 on Channing Frye or $30 million on Channing Frye because you have the money. Like that's not usually it's not a great way to spend the money. Even the Knicks, $100 million for Amari, they can't get his knees insured. You know, so I do think. But
if there are 29 other owners, it's great because now you're saying not only will you take a bigger share of the total salary load, but you won't destroy us in the process. You know, like you're not guaranteeing championships. So you're just all that spending. I mean, Mark Cuban defied the odds this year in being the flat out crazy spender who wins. But I kind of like it. It's like when the Knicks really just tried to spend their way to a championship, they spent their way into certain doom. So it's like the smart teams are still happy with that.
Well, yes and no, because it still comes down to who you're getting in the top 5. Like you look at Houston, I think Houston's done really smart things with their salary cap for 5 years, and it's a mediocre team.
Because their top guys just were injured and.
Yeah, I mean they lost Yao and they lost T-Mac, and you're in that middle of the road thing, and you can't replace those guys.
Right.
And you know, it still comes down to you. Even look last night. Somebody lucked out last night with a franchise guy, and that was the beauty of last night's draft. We don't know who that franchise guy is, but one of those guys will be a guy, I think. And maybe it's Enes Kanter, maybe it's the Lithuanian guy, I don't know. But somebody lucked out. I think it's
pronounced Enes, but if you say Enes, then you get to say, Enes, you dipstick!
Henry Abbott.
I've been wanting to say, like, for a month now.
Henry Abbott, we'll check you out on True Hoop. Thanks for the time. Much appreciated.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. It was fun.
All right.
Show House.
What's happening?
What is happening?
I don't know. We needed 2 minutes. I am giving you 2 minutes on Jan Vesely.
He's the best kisser the Washington Wizards have ever had. Actually, I just violated one of my brand new rules. I decided after the new uniforms were unveiled last month that I'm never again referring to the Washington professional basketball team by the cynical and by now terribly played nickname. So the Washington professional basketball team. He's the best kisser.
You're not going to call them the Wizards?
No, I'm
You're
not.
Done?
I'm done. Over it.
The Washington
was a bad idea in the first place, and by now it's taken on a taint that will never be untainted.
Well, can we just call them Chocolate City? Why can't
sure,
we just get that
I love
going?
that.
Chocolate City. I mean, the YouTube highlights are pretty exciting.
Of him?
Yeah.
Well,
that guy seems like he's going to be fun to watch. Am I crazy?
Here's my problem with it. They're against Estonia and Uzbekistan, I think. I mean, how can I put this in a politically appropriate, sensitive way? You know,
not a lot of those guys in the National Basketball Association.
I don't think so. I can't think of the last guy from either one of those places that's landed. There
was a whitish tinge to that clip.
Whitish. A certain halo effect, maybe.
Yeah. So,
anyway,
right.
So he looked really athletic, and he's flying around against those guys. You know, congratulations. We still have Yi Jianlan on this team, and he dominated the hell out of that chair.
He killed that chair.
Murdered that chair.
Nobody can sit in that chair anymore.
That's right.
Listen, I think you're being a little cynical. I'm not going to lie. Your team has John Wall on it. You got the Jordan Crawford pick. You have Nick Young, who averaged less than 0.0 assists per minute last year. It was somehow negative. You have a bunch of high-flying forwards that maybe aren't the brightest bulbs in the shed, but guys who can go and run and get alley-oops.
The jury's out. I mean, I personally would have preferred if, since it was clear that we were not going to, yes, I'm using we, move up in the draft and get the two guys that I feel like are kind of can't miss guys, which are Derrick Williams and Enes Kanter. If we're not going to go in that direction, then I personally would have liked Bismack. I would have liked the Bismack key.
Bismack Biyombo?
That's who I would have gone for. Because
I agree.
It would have been, to me, such a breath of fresh air to this particular set of guys here on the Washington professional basketball team in terms of a guy who, by all appearances, all indications, is selfless, has an enormous motor. All of his energy is focused on running all around the floor like a crazy man. He blocks shots, and I think the combination of him and McGee could be pretty vital, could be pretty interesting. Two guys that protect the rim. I don't know anything about the Bismack Key's basketball IQ, but I do know all about his motor, and motor is something that the Washington professional basketball team has been lacking the last 2-3 years.
I think you'll be on the bandwagon by mid-December.
I have an open mind. I'm
going to make this prediction. You're 23 alley-oops away from being on the bandwagon. I'm going to count them as they happen.
That's the over-under?
Yeah, 23.
Okay.
Most importantly, what do you think of the hats?
The hats? I love the hats. I almost tweeted last night where do I get one of those hats?
The DC hat was very cool. I mean, that might have been the coolest hat in 30 years for a Washington franchise.
That's a fact. It's an awesome hat. Actually, you know what? The Nationals hats are cool, too. That's curly W. That's a pretty cool hat.
Joe, any lingering thoughts on the draft? Other than the one that you just said that we had to edit out because it was offensive.
It wasn't that offensive. It was complimentary in its own way.
It made Joe Meade clench.
Well, my job here is done. I loved it from a Washington perspective. Why did Chris Singleton fall all the way to 18? What was wrong with him? I was very excited that Kawhi Leonard was dropping. I got really fired up from a purely Washington perspective. It was a fine draft. I was interested, and anytime my wife, who was sitting and watching in the background, asks, "Who are all these foreigners?" You know something good is going on with the draft.
So you think anytime anybody says, "Who are all these foreigners?" in any sort of a television situation, that's a win?
That's a win. Yeah, okay. I enjoyed it. I made it all the way through the whole first round.
Yeah, I don't know. It was tough to work with from a draft diary standpoint. I did my best, but it was like, man, I had to import Jacoby and Wilds, and I had to. I definitely had to work on that one a little bit harder because these guys are so self-aware now. It's like
there are some great underrated moments. I mean, the kiss was spontaneous.
Kiss was great.
The interview with a guy who doesn't speak English, whose name I can't pronounce right now, that was spectacular.
Let me throw this at you, though. It's time to spruce this draft up from ESPN's standpoint. Like, why wasn't Meta World Peace our sideline reporter last night?
That's true.
Meta World Peace should have been interviewing every draft pick.
There's no reason not to be creative with it. There are definitely some young guys in the league that could have done interesting things, and especially some of the college rivalries that are in place. I would have liked to have seen, I don't know, somebody like somebody from North Carolina interview Kyrie Irving, a Duke guy, and tell him, hey, welcome to the league, Or Shane Battier. Shane Battier could have interviewed Kyrie Irving.
All due respect, Heather Cox does a really good job, but I think that should be a player. Like, I would have Jared Dudley, Kevin Love, somebody of that realm. Like, have them go in there and be goofy. They're going to ask weird questions. The players are going to loosen up because it's another player, and you might have something really substantial, I feel like.
I agree. Why didn't you suggest this earlier?
I suggested it last year. They didn't listen to me. It was the end of my column. All right. Joe House, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
So I get to sign off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.